Inclusion Facilitator under the UNU platform, Umoja na Usawa, which means unity and equality. Umoja na Usawa in Swahili. John?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is John Cornwell. I'm based in Mombasa in Kenya. Also a member of Umoja na Usawa. Pleasure to be here. I'm in the process of joining IACD. It's probably not been gone through the bureaucracy yet, but pleasure to join and to be here with all of you today. So to kick us off, I'm going to ask you to go to menti.com. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this, but you can either use your phone or you can do it on the computer if you prefer. So just basically go to menti.com and type in the code when you're asked for a code, okay? And I've put that in the chat as well, okay? So I'm now gonna start sharing what you'll see. And this is just really a quick introduction, just to set the scene. So once you're in there, you can see the code at the top, 45632457. Once you're there, you can start answering the first question. I know we've got a lot of answers in the chat already. So Scotland is there, and Australia is there, Kenya is there, Germany as well. I know we've already seen where's Malaysia, Zimbabwe is here. Okay. Okay, see, these seem to be the countries. If somehow you can't access Menti, please just put your answer in the chat and we'll read them out once they pop up. So here's the next question. What work do you do? Just in a couple of words. Okay, I'm assuming that most people are community development practitioners, but not necessarily. What work do you do? Just briefly. Okay, we have a project coordinator, a community practitioner, outreach and homeless support, a student at Kenyatta University, PhD candidate, grassroots human rights work, community development, and something else, probably not enough words, sorry about that. Inclusive community development, college lecturer, academic, coordinating community development projects. Okay, another one in the chat says PhD student of community development. Okay, that's great. So an interesting mix of people working in the field and academics, all connected with community development. Sorry, I've gone too far here. Now here's the next question. What is your understanding of social inclusion? Just any thoughts? What does it mean to you? This is what we'll be looking at in the session today. So any thoughts? So what is your understanding of social inclusion? Equality, togetherness and belonging, designing programs and projects with people with disabilities in mind, inclusion of all people from all societal levels, okay, addressing inequalities socially and economically, shared values, full and equal participation of all, across spectrum of all diversification, accommodating everyone irrespective of social status, collectivity, an active process to challenge structural inequality, enabling any marginal group into a benefit or opportunity, being able to involve everyone into the different activities taking place in the community, inclusion of marginalized groups and everyone. It's a pretty good definition, I think. Quite comprehensive. Okay, so here's our last slide, which is just a thought to kick us off. A great quote from Desmond Tutu, who said, "If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you're neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality." Okay, so this is just something to get us thinking. Some hearts coming up, so that's nice. A few people giving hearts. So that's really a thought that we're sharing with you as we move more deeply into the topic. I'll hand over back to Nancy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John, for that session. It's really nice to know how diverse we are in the room, but also that everyone has an idea of what we are covering. So that, please mute if you can. There is a bit of noise from somewhere. Yes, so it's really good to know that we don't even have to go to the basics, because like we all know, inclusion is very central to the practice of community development, or should be central to it. So we'll just do a brief introduction, and I'll begin with sharing who we are as Umoja na Usawa. We've mentioned that this is a network that we both belong to. It's a network of facilitators across the region. Basically, these are people who are focused on the space of inclusion, yeah? So mostly what we do is in facilitation of social inclusion, both pro bono, paid, and all that. We support different organizations depending on what their capacity is. We'll come to that, but we usually use a certain model that we call the model of oppression that we will share in detail. Some of what we've managed to do here is training of facilitators to increase our membership, which is not as big, of course, as IACD currently. I think we are around 30 to 40 spread across the region. We've worked with several organizations currently in the region. Like you can see, we've also facilitated sessions or dialogues known as I Can't Breathe, which are basically themed around racism with UN volunteers and IAF. IAF is International Association of Facilitators. We've also developed a social inclusion facilitation standard and curricula that we usually use in these sessions, just so that there is harmony and standardization of approach. We have also presented in several conferences, one of them being the IACD, one in Ireland, and also IAF, International Association of Facilitators. We also run a blog known as Embrace Everyone blog that we will share. And we are also we'll share the link for that. And we are also starting up with a dialogue known as Embrace Dialogues, which is just about looking into different books and discussing elements of the book that touch on inclusion to make the practice a bit more relevant and close to home. This can be either fiction books or even textbooks. So that is some of what we do. We were founded in 2012, I believe. And our model is just, our vision is just to promote a more inclusive world, and that inclusion is part of every work we do and every engagement we are in. Over to you, John. Oh, sorry, this is still me covering this session, which is still an introduction of what we are going to cover. We thought it will be useful.
Nancy, you're muted, eh?
So sorry, Nancy. I muted you. I was trying to mute somebody else. Sorry.
Oh, sorry about that.
I'm so sorry. That was my fault.
That's okay. Yeah, I was wondering how that happened. Yeah. Yeah, so basically looking at some terminologies that we'll be using in the session, but which you've also been using as community development practitioners. We have exclusion here, and this is a really good depiction of it when some are in and some are outside, and it's not clear why. We know that there are many reasons why people are left out, but there is no good reason. We have reasons why we do this, but really when we look at the ultimate cause, we can see that it's based on some levels of oppression and superiority, ideas of superiority, which we'll come to. So this depicts exclusion. The next one covers integration, where you've brought in different diverse groups, but they're really not included in the space. And I link integration to also some models of diversity, because diversity, you find people are more interested in different groups coming in together, but really not the fundamental approach, what we are doing to make sure the diverse groups bond together and work together and feel like they belong in that space. So this is just to sort of differentiate the different terminologies. So diversity is something that is covered a lot, but it's really not inclusion. It's good to bring people who are different in one place, but for inclusion, you have to go beyond bringing people who you believe are of different groups, and this is what we'll come to in this session, given that we've already given different definitions of inclusion. For me, what I like to look at when I think of inclusion is whatever I'm doing, looking at who is in, who is out, why are they out, and what can I do about it, so I sort of use that approach to look at all the projects and activities I'm linked in to see how I can be more inclusive in approach. Yes, over to you, John. And this is just a sentence that says that understanding the economic cost of inclusion leads to integration, but equally understanding the emotional cost of exclusion will lead to true inclusion. Yes,
okay,
John.
thanks, Nancy. So Nancy mentioned earlier that we use something that we call the model of oppression. And I'm just going to basically take people through it very quickly. Usually it's a 2-3 day workshop, so we just wanted to give people an approximate idea of what we base our work on. And this was developed by an organization called OSDC, Organizational and Social Development Consultants. And in the early days, they used this a lot in Southern Africa. It was very much a response to apartheid, which was really focusing a lot on sexism and racism in particular, but they kind of broadened it out to look at all forms of oppression. So in brief, this is how it works. And just maybe to mention that at each level of this, we usually have several activities to help people understand the terminology, so to kind of have a very kind of smooth flow. But we thought it'd be helpful to share the model itself, which starts with our attitudes. Broken down, that's our assumptions, stereotypes, the prejudices we all hold, and the values we all hold. Now, in themselves, our attitudes could be harmful to ourselves if they're negative attitudes, but it's actually only when we have power to do something about those attitudes that it can lead to discrimination. Okay, so negative attitudes plus some power in a certain situation can lead to discrimination of different kinds. Okay, now on top of that, we have another level where we talk about what we call the ideology of superiority. And you hear people talking about supremacy, white supremacy or male supremacy. It could also be the ideology of able-bodied superiority or superiority of upper stroke middle class or a particular country, particular ethnic group, religion, etc. So this kind of brings in the systemic nature of oppression, the ideology that has been built up over a long period of time, which leads to oppression of different kinds. So we talk about the ideology of white superiority leading to racism, the ideology of male superiority leading to sexism, etc. And we recognize also that, of course, there's, people can experience multiple forms of oppression, which is nowadays known as intersectionality. and we try to work across, rather than just on single issues, but looking at the impact of all of these different types of discrimination and oppression. Now, in the workshop, the second bit of this is really looking at how to undo some of this, okay? And basically how to promote inclusion through understanding. The first step is really understanding how oppression works. So in brief, what we would talk about is, a lot of people say we need to change people's attitudes, and that's true, that's important. But also we need to work at every level of this. So we need to, when we have power, we need to use that in a responsible and in a just way rather than to discriminate. We need to reduce the impact of discrimination, support the victims of discrimination. And a very key level is the ideology of superiority, which, if you look at some of these big ideologies of superiority, the way they're so deeply rooted across the world, it's not an easy task. But what the model teaches us is that we need to really chip away at systemic oppression of different kinds in different ways, and therefore promote social inclusion and promote equality and justice as a result of that. So very briefly, that's the model that we do our work by. And I'll hand back to Nancy for the next part.
Yes, we welcome your inputs and your questions on the chat section. Yeah, and we appreciate that we have a few minutes to cover what does take days to cover, but we hope that there's some bit of connection in terms of the model we use to practice as Umoja and Usawa Network. Yes, so here we are just looking at how we are, I think, hopefully agreeing that inclusion is central into the work of community development. And I have on the circle, just the cycle, of course, we know the reality is the practice of community development is not that clear cut, yeah? There's a lot of iteration, yeah? But this is a simplified version of it where we talk about starting from organization, then analysis, then communicating, then design or plan of whatever activity you want to do in community development, then implementation of the community development intervention, then evaluation, yeah? And basically the summary of what we are sharing is, of course, inclusion is central in it. And I think it's very clear from the IACD community development standards that there is that appreciation that social justice is critical to the space of community development. And so the how do we actually do this is just about going at every stage and looking at how are we ensuring that no one is left behind in every process that we take as community development. And we also say that if you realize that you're at the implementation stage and inclusion was not a consideration at all, unfortunately, there is still time to begin at the stage where we realize this was not a factor that we looked at, yeah? Yeah, so just a summary of what John has shared as well, that community development must be about tackling oppression and inequality. And the International Association of Community Development Standards are very clear that community development should be an empowering professional, right? And this is where we start from. And one of the areas we can, I know most of our projects are in these two types, either targeted approach. Our programs directly target groups that we refer to as marginalized or disadvantaged groups. For example, women program, youth program, and all that. And just an appreciation that even when the project is targeted, none of these groups is homogeneous. So we must always go and break it down. Yes, it's a women group and it sounds like it's very inclusive, but even in the women group, there are women with disability. There are women who are economically empowered, some are not, so that even when we have targeted projects, we must consider the group is not homogeneous, and so that we must break it down so that we identify who is in, who is out, who is left behind, and what can we do about it, yeah? Then we have the mainstream approach where we have community development interventions that may not really specifically target disadvantaged groups, but our challenge is just that even so, we must always look at who is in, who is out, yeah? And how can we ensure they're included, yeah? For example, maybe a school. Yeah, it's fine, school is for everyone and that's good and fine, but where there are people, you'll find there'll always be issues of inclusion, power differences, and all that. So just making sure that we also look at, when it's mainstream approach, how do we make sure inclusion is part of everything we do, even in such projects, so that the project is running, but there's also the behind the screen part of ensuring that we are not leaving anyone behind in our interventions. So it's just a summary of what we've said prior to this. Yes, over to you, John. Please feel free to comment and add your questions in the chat room as we continue. We have to rush a bit because of the time.
So when are we going to raise some questions that we got from the group?
Any time from now, basically. So welcome back, everybody. And, you know, I've seen that we've got lots and lots of stuff coming up from all the groups. And I was just saying to Meredith, probably if we added another half an hour, even that might not be enough. So apologies if, you know, if we cut you off a bit early, probably as you were deep in discussion. But what I think we can do is just hear some comments from, you know, maybe 1 or 2 points from each group. We're going to look at the first question first. Please share a few key reflections and observations from your discussions. Okay, we probably won't have time to hear everything, but let's have 1 or 2 points from each group, if that's okay. Who would like to go first? We've got 4
can I go first?
Please do, yeah.
In our group, we came up with a question: how do we handle a community that is so religious and that does not embrace inclusiveness? How do we handle, I don't know, maybe you understand, a thick community that is so religious biased and inclusiveness is not tolerated? How do we operate as a practitioner in such a community?
Okay. And what were the thoughts? That was a question you rose, or maybe you didn't have a clear response to that. Anybody want to come in here? Maybe from another group?
Especially group 1, because we covered a lot of this topic, dealing with how to first gain respect from a community before we introduce our idea. Anything, Mudhoni, Elizabeth, Benjamin? Because it might be relevant to this case.
How to respect the community or what? I've not got the question very well.
He's asking, how will you handle a community that is very religious, where some of these ideas will not be taken in well?
Religious leaders.
Maybe I can add on what Elizabeth has said. The key thing about how to handle a community which is very religious is to know the entry points of that community. If it's the issue with the religion, being so much religious, then the pastors and the bishops and the religious leaders are the entry point in that community. Otherwise, you'll have so much hard time working in that community.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Benjamin. Okay, so there's a couple of thoughts. Von, anything else from your group that you'd like to share? Or anybody else in that group? I think that was group 2, yeah?
That was group 1.
Yeah, no, but the question came from group 2.
Oh,
right?
oh, sorry. Oh,
and the answers came from group 1. That was quite nice. we didn't plan it that way. Okay, well, let's go to another group, maybe group 3. Any key points that came up for you that you'd like to share? Anybody in group 3? And that was Devette, Dominique, Jim, Lisa, and Sunday.
I think Sunday had a good summary at the closure when we ended. You should probably complete that.
Sunday, would you like to come in?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, can do now. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Please
Yeah,
go ahead.
one of the questions that came up in our group has to do with designing community development projects, having the people who are disadvantaged in mind without considering people who are privileged, people that we assume to be wealthy. And I was trying to say that a good community development project or a good project that has inclusion in mind should target everybody, irrespective of the social status of people. And I was trying to make a point that if we actually want to do that, we need to bring everyone on board at the planning stage. Yes, if we are designing for instance, we are designing a project for people that are living with disabilities, it is not enough to bring these people that are living with disabilities alone together. We should also bring people who are able, people who do not have any physical or mental disabilities, so that they also will be able to bring their ideas, their opinions about what areas can they also benefit from the projects or from the programs. So that was the point we try to deliberate upon in our group. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Sunday. That's a great summary. Appreciated. Let's go to group 4. Group 4, that was Simbarashe, Al-Khair, Beraket, Joel, and Sarah. Oh, Jim, you want to come in?
Joel.
Yes, I'm here, Joel. Hello?
Yep, can hear you, Joe.
Okay,
Please
so
go ahead.
Yes, we looked at about 3 or 4 salient issues. We thought that there should be recognition. We should be able to recognize the excluded in communities and involve them in community development activities. So every activity that is organized in the community takes into consideration the excluded in the community, so that they feel that they are part of the community. And then also we looked at awareness creation, community engagement, that we engage communities and preach the message of inclusion to them. But in our community engagement, we divide the community into clusters. So we have stakeholders, community leadership, and then we have opinion leaders, and then the community members. Because usually, if you want to change behavior, you target leadership. And once the leadership gets the idea of inclusion, it is easy to get to the people. And so we also came up with coming up with an action plan even before the sensitization and community engagement, which will direct the affairs of our activities, maybe within a period of time. So basically, that is what we discussed. I sent these details to you via email.
Sure, yeah, thank you, Joel. Yeah, and I've just added them to the document. But that's a great summary, thank you. All right, I'm conscious that maybe group 1 didn't have much input apart from responding to the question. But has anybody else got anything they'd like to add before we move to wrap up the session? Any other points that maybe should be made?
Maybe I can add something on group 1.
Please do, yeah.
Concern that question. But maybe I can highlight something that's tackled, that the key strategy is working with the community members, not working for them. That one will achieve the sustainability of the project, because they'll have the idea that this is our project, this is their project. So for them to have the idea that this is our project and they own the project or the program, then we ought to work with them, especially the mostly marginalized, as we've seen in group 1, that's women and girls and children. We've also saw that it's good to tailor-make projects to fit the community, that understanding the cultural beliefs in that community and what all it entails. We've also saw it's also important to factor the indigenous knowledge in the community, because we understand that the community has knowledge that we can use, and also they have resources, that is locally resources, that we can use when including them in the projects for sustainability, because at the end of the day, we need those projects to continue. So we can also share the information and knowledge rather than imposing them to the community. That's what we feel, everybody will feel included in that project or the program. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Benjamin. Thank you. I heard a very key word: working with people, not for them. I think that's really key in this. Thank you.
Can I mention
Jim,
something here, John?
Please come in. Yeah.
It's just to say that in the northeast of England here, we now have 3 in different local authorities what are called Poverty Truth Commissions. And the Poverty Truth Commission model was actually developed in Scotland, around Glasgow, and it learned from what had happened in the Mandela times in South Africa, you know, of actually having these Poverty Truth Commissions where local people are actually seen to be the experts, sitting down with those at quite a high, powerful level to look at decisions and look at discussions. And that's been very, very successful in the UK using that model, and local people are actually called testifying commissioners. So they actually have the status of being a commissioner with testifying as a front. Now, these in a sense do actually challenge the way that you know, that normal communications can happen, but I think the principle behind it is actually worth exploring. And
a contribution from behind there somewhere.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm just saying that I think that's reasonably well documented now and available on Google and things, to if people want to look at that particular model. But it was developed in, you know, in the west of Scotland in an interesting way. But as we now have 3 of these in the northeast of England, and it's a structure which allows the debate to happen and challenging. It's not just about one group saying, but allows a process of challenge to happen.
Great. Thank you for that, Jim. Thank you for sharing. And thanks, everyone. I just put a message in the chat that, you know, if you've still got more to add to the document, please keep writing in it, maybe for the next hour or 2. And then after that, we'll download it and we'll ask Meredith to share that with everybody, so we keep that as a record. But I hope that was useful and helpful. Over to you, Nancy.
Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, for your generosity in sharing your insights in this. It sounds like there's already a lot going on, and I think it was really lovely to have this space to share and learn from each other. I'll just summarize the points into 5 in terms of the tips that you shared. Participation and consultation is very important for inclusive projects. Use questions rather than giving people, oh, we want to do this. Just ask, what are you doing? Do you feel this could contribute to what you're doing? Strategy and tactic is important for promoting inclusion. You just don't go and say, oh, we want you to add women or youth or people with disability in this project. It has to work. You have to work with respect for indigenous knowledge, consultation as well. Also that we must have a tailored approach to change. Yeah, you can't just pick one from Nairobi and take it to Rwanda, for example. You have to understand the community you're working with before you promote some of these aspects. Also that we must also consider inclusion generates sustainability. When everyone is part of a project that we are working on, it means that whether there is funding or not, whether you are there or not, the project continues and it causes change, actual change in the community, even if it takes time. Yeah. I also liked a summary of what we've done today is that we are working with the community, not for the community. So they need to be part of everything that we are working on. Please share your highlights and what you thought about the session in the chat room. For us, I think we will say over to Stella, unless John, you want to add something to this. Thank you so much for your time.
John, you want to add something?
No, not really. I think if you move to the next slide, Nancy, it will give our contacts. You can just write to either of us at this email address if you want to get in touch. And I've been putting the link for the blog below. But thank you everybody for your participation. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, John, for this wonderful exercise and webinar, and a process of at least getting to learn more ideas about social inclusion. And at least you made it a practical experience for us to be able to include us in what you wanted to discuss. So that many times you can go to meetings where we are not involved and we sit there, for instance, for 2 hours, just listening to one person. So at least for this one, it has given us the practical experience so that even as we go to the communities, how do we make sure that we involve the people in the communities? So that as we go with our different projects, our different ideas, at the end of the day, how do we bring the community to be part of those projects, to be part of those ideas, so that we don't go to the communities and we just share what we have, not including the members of the community. So it's a practical experience. At least what you are discussing from the theory part, you are able now to use it to be able to see how do we make sure that everybody is part of us. So that if you think about our communities, for instance, very many things are happening, which are leading people to become distinct groups. So how do we make sure all those different groups are brought together so that you can be able to develop our communities, you can be able to empower our communities, so that we can make sure these communities can also be able to sustain themselves even after we exit from these communities. So we appreciate for this presentation and thank you for finding time to be our speakers for the day and to guide us through the whole process. So I think because time is far much spent, that's where we can stop it for today. On the chat box, I've shared the next webinar, which will be on social audits and community development next month on 13th. So also find time to be able to join us as we talk about the different social audits that we have to do in our different communities. So I'm Stella Masese. I was standing in for Dr. Muya, who is not around. He sent his kind regards, but for next month, you'll be able to join, so you'll be able to interact with him. So thank you, nice afternoon, and good morning for those ones who are still in the morning. Yeah, so back to you, Meredith, if you have anything or any announcements to share. If not, from our side, we are done. We meet next month.
Thanks for being here, everybody. Just echo what Stella said. Thank you.